And let's go on to the onto the ugly as the Cowboys offense looked. Who do you think is more to blame for the Cowboys? Do you think it's Dak Prescott, Mike McCarthy, Kellen Moore? It's definitely not the defense because they did all they did. I mean, they weren't the best in the fourth quarter, but they got tired. But who do you think is to blame more for the Cowboys' offensive struggles?
Yeah, you know what? And I hate to say it. I think it's Dak Prescott. Don't you? I think it's Prescott.
It seemed to be kind of a lot of all three. I think kind of a mix. And Prescott, he looked good against the Buccaneers, but the Buccaneers weren't a good team. I mean, they probably shouldn't have been in the playoffs, but they benefited from being in one of the worst divisions of all time. But I feel like it was kind of an all mix of Kellen Moore, Mike McCarthy, and Dak Prescott. I mean, I think they all did not do well. But
it definitely is, and it's hard to assess blame. But when this team, paid Dak as much as they did, and they still can't make it over the hump, I mean, Kellen Moore is the play caller. I mean, you can argue some of the plays weren't great, especially at the end, but it's hard to just blame the offensive play caller because Dak is, going out there next year. Mike McCarthy obviously hasn't done the best job. He's won a Super Bowl as a head coach. I think he's proven himself enough to be fit for the job. But, when you look at the offense as a whole, you mentioned the defense and everything they did. This is a hard San Francisco 49ers offense to really attack. And the offense just every year they seem to be great in the regular season. At one point I know I made a post, I put them in the Super Bowl contenders list without even thinking about it. And once they get down to prime time under the spotlight, this offense just seems to kind of disappear.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Cowboys did pay Dak Prescott a lot of money, and they were expecting him to take that next step. And we thought he was taking that next step, but then the Cowboys did what the Cowboys do, and the Chargers did the same thing. The Cowboys and Chargers are kind of in that same boat where I don't trust them, and I actually trusted them too much this year, and it really maybe looked bad. But I think Prescott is to blame. He did not play very well. He should have probably threw 3 interceptions instead of 2, and they almost won, which is how good that defense is. And as you mentioned, Mike McCarthy, he's not the best, but he's got a Super Bowl and he's led the Cowboys to back-to-back 12 wins, and they made the playoffs in the last 2 years. They didn't win they won the division last year, I think, if I can remember right. But as we all know, the Eagles won this year, but it's still, I mean, there is still a lot of blame, but I feel like all the blame should be on the 3. But yeah, Dak Prescott deserves a lot of blame, especially with how poor they played.
I was going to say the interception problem too seemed to be really prevalent at the end of the season. He missed a huge chunk of this season and he still, led the league in turnover ratio in a negative light. So that, you cannot turn the ball over that much, especially when you have a great running game, terrific offensive line, and a weapon like CeeDee Lamb.
And what do you think? And I've heard too that the Cowboys might need to get more receivers, and they probably shouldn't have got rid of Amari Cooper. I think that was huge. But what do you think the Cowboys will do with Cooper Rush? He's definitely not going to be their starter next year, but do you think he's on a different team next year?
Yeah, he's another guy who I think proved himself. And, he was 5-0 before that. I remember it was Sunday Night Football against the Eagles. And I mean, the Eagles were just simply the better team. It wasn't really his fault. And, it's hard to really put trust in him because we talk about Jordan Love. I mean, it's another guy you haven't seen a lot. And to, make him a starting quarterback probably isn't the right decision. But with that being said, I think a team will give him money. We've seen, a lot of quarterbacks go down to injuries. And he's proven himself to be at least a serviceable backup in this league. I think he'll find himself in a different team next year with a decent amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah, because Cooper Rush played well, as you mentioned. Yeah, he lost to the Eagles, but the Eagles were outside the Chiefs were the best team in football. And I do think the Eagles aren't getting as much praise as they should. But I mean, yeah, Cooper Rush played well. He didn't have the best stats, but I mean, his job was just to win games while Dak was out. And I kind of forgot about that because it was such a long time ago. But yeah, I think he went 4-1 as the starter. And I think he threw.
And I remember at one point where there was should we bring Dak back when he's healthy and make him the starter or keep Cooper Rush, which seems ridiculous now, but it was a real debate, I remember.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned too, the Saints are going to be looking for a quarterback this year because they can't draft one because they don't have a first-round pick. And it would be interesting to see where he goes. I think Jimmy Garoppolo will end up in New Orleans, but it's interesting to see where Cooper Rush would be. And I feel like the Cowboys, I think they can trade him because I don't think he's a free agent. I think the Cowboys need to trade him. But one more question on the Cowboys before we jump to the AFC and the NFC championship games. Or actually, before we jump, before we jump to Sean Payton. But do you think the Cowboys need to add more talent on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it's tough to say because I mean, their needs are really like super specific, which kind of speaks to, how complete they are as a team. Like I think the really only thing this team needs, but because they have talent basically everywhere else in the field, and you look at it, is a second wide receiver behind CeeDee Lamb. It seemed like Amari Cooper was that guy. They moved on from him. There was rumors of Odell Beckham all year long, and Noah Brown played well. They brought in T.Y. Hilton, but they never found a true answer there, especially with Dalton Schultz likely departing due to free agency. They have some talent there, young talent behind him with Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot at tight end. So I think a second wide receiver makes sense, especially with some freed up cap space due to Dalton Schultz likely moving away to the team at free agency.
Yeah, that's another good point as well. And a lot of people were saying too that, Zeke is no longer their best running back even on the team. It's Tony Pollard, which I would probably agree. And, DeAndre Hopkins, it looks like he's available. I mean, maybe a trade. This probably wouldn't work, but maybe you swap Zeke out for DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know. It'd be kind of a thought, but it probably wouldn't happen. But it would be entertaining to see what the Cowboys do, because I think when they moved on from Amari Cooper, that wasn't the best idea. And they should have just paid. I mean, I think they would have had the money, maybe not because they paid Prescott so much, but we'll see what Dallas does.